Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, welcome to another episode of the ASB Investment Podcast, where we delve into key financial topics to help you secure a better future. I'm your host, Nigel Grant, and today we're talking about what's going on in the minds of what is undoubtedly one of the most important decision-making roles in business, the Chief Financial Officer. Now, depending on what size business you're in, this could be someone who sits on an executive team in a massive company supported by hundreds of people, maybe, or it could be the same person who's the company owner, sales manager, or operations manager, or marketing manager. In other words, the owner-operator who runs the whole thing in and of themselves. So regardless of the type, the function is critical as they decide how and what investments are made by companies. So in light of that importance, our conversation today is guided by a recent piece of work called The Mood of the CFO, not them being in a mood, just how they're going. A new report issued by recruitment company Hunter Campbell. So Lee Marshall, who's the managing partner there, is here to talk to us through that. And just to make sure it's not me and Lee talking to each other about CFOs, we're also joined by a real-life CFO, Scott Moore from Trade Me. So, gents, welcome. Great to have you along. How are you both?
Very well, thanks, Nigel. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here. Cheers, Nigel.
And before we get into it, just Lee, we'll ask you first. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and I guess either what your typical day looks like for Hunter Campbell, or or what you do in your spare time.
Yeah, so as you said in the intro, managing partner at Hunter Campbell. We're an executive search and recruitment business specialising in finance and accounting, supply chain and sales and marketing. I guess I wear a lot of different hats, right? So founder, shareholder, director. I spend a bit of time with my fellow founders, John Neville and Ken Webb, sort of navigating our way through the economic downturn that we've got at the moment. My day job as the managing partner basically runs the business day to day. I've got a really talented leadership team that I do that with, and essentially running the operation of the business. A little bit of spare time.
Yes.
We're a football family, so very family orientated. Spend a lot of time with my wife Rochelle and my two kids Teddy and Bonnie, and we've just come off my first season coaching Teddy's football team. So looking forward to getting my Saturdays back sometime soon.
Yeah, I don't think they're coming back. And Scott, you?
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm a real life CFO, as you say. I'm an accountant by trade. I've
Yes.
been a CFO for the last 8 years. And like many CFOs, have quite a broad remit, broad role, finance, commercial partners, strategy, M&A, legal, compliance, and some operational functions.
So you have no spare time?
Not a lot of spare time. I do find a little bit of fun in life, outside of finance. But, I see my core mission as a CFO to ensure that strategy translates into performance. And as part of that, obviously a lot of investment decisions, which is obviously core to your podcast thing.
Nice plug.
From a personal perspective, live in Auckland, wife, 2 kids and a dog. So running around with them most of the time. My kids play a lot of ripper rugby down at the mighty Takapuna Rugby Club, and I actually coach my son's rugby team down there as well. So
2 coaches.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, lovely.
Change the theme of the podcast.
The parent corner, parent coaching corner. I was just going to give an update just basically on what I've been doing, which is, for the purposes of the podcast, trying to get my lawn back into a sort of a state that is warrants my garden. I think people know that I always talk about my garden, but it's been a horrific year for lawn growing. So the next quarter, I guess depending on what CFOs are focused on, yours truly is focused on resowing and re-nurturing my lawn. So that's what I'm focused on. The report itself, Lee, we'll get into it. What's the Mood of the CFO report all about, and why did you guys, I guess, create it, and who fit into it?
Yeah, so accounting and finance is one of our cornerstone specializations, as I mentioned, and we work with a lot of the country's leading CFOs. CFOs are pivotal figures in business strategy and performance, much like what Scott just mentioned there. They consider economic and legislative factors on a daily basis. They're often the co-pilot to the CEO in a business as well. And before now, we felt that they never really had a platform to have their voices heard. And that's what we wanted to create. So when we set out, our goal was to create a report that offered invaluable insights into economic landscape from the viewpoint of the country's leading CFOs. We went out to about 450 CFOs. It was really well supported, given the fact that it was our first time in market. So we got about a 40% response rate, 173 contributions, 600 verbatim responses. And just to give you some context as to kind of you mentioned the size and scale of different CFO roles. So about 70% of the respondents had over 20 years experience, and they were largely reflective of medium businesses with sort of over 100 employees. So,
okay, so they're that end of the scale.
Yes,
This is
medium to large rather than right the very small.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of listed businesses that fed in as well.
450 CFOs that you engage with, it's, these people are short on time, very busy. So I guess it's a validation of you guys and the work you do. What, I guess at a high level, what were the key findings that stand out?
Yeah, so the key thing overall, really, from our perspective, was that the CFOs, they had a surprisingly, I guess, given the current economic landscape, a surprisingly strong outlook for the year ahead. Around 30% are either reasonably upbeat around growth in the next 12 months. But we're also a little bit pleasantly surprised by the resilience of businesses and what they've shown in the last 12 months. So, you look at the mainstream media headlines and they would have you think that businesses are really, really hard up against it.
Yeah.
But only 21% of the reported CFOs that reported back had declining revenues. And 41% either met or exceeded their revenue growth targets. So probably suggests that it might not be quite as bad out there as some of the sort of the mainstream media would have you believe. Really.
Don't believe everything you read.
Yeah, exactly right.
And those sort of broad findings, as much as you can obviously say, Scott, did they align with your experience as a CFO generally, or what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think so. I think CFOs feel cautiously optimistic about the outlook. I mean, I think there's some context here, which is, as a CFO, and shout out to all my fellow CFOs, we've been through a heap of economic turmoil over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
It starts with COVID, obviously, but that created massive liquidity crunch, and then following that, surge in asset prices, inflation, interest rates following that.
You name it.
And now recession, and now an easing cycle coming through. All of these challenges fall at the feet of the CFO to handle. So when you think about looking forward based on the findings in the report, I mean, things can't get much worse than what we've been through, right? So, again, cautiously optimistic looking ahead. And with the interest rates coming down, logic would suggest things should ease up and could be better for investing. And the point around resilience, like having battled through that last 5-year period, I think you've created a lot of resilient executives out there, especially in the CFO role, and resilient businesses that will emerge stronger with a muscle to handle crisis. So I feel good about where we're sitting, but cautious.
I like that cautious. Proceed forward with caution is what I heard a while ago. In the report, it talked about sort of the key challenges CFOs are faced with at the moment, and I know sort of Scott's mentioned a couple of them, but you. And as we were prepping for this, you were sort of looking at 4 of the biggest challenges being, cost, economic conditions. What are the, and others? What are the key ones that stand out for you?
Yeah, so this is where the balance of the report really shows some interesting findings for me. So, as I mentioned, there's a cautious optimism, but actually, I think right here, right now, there's some things in the report that would suggest we're not quite out of the woods just yet. And so, a massive 92% of the CFOs said that they're expecting to be grappling with macro factors outside of their control in the next 12 months. And so, as you mentioned, some of those things in there, the top 4, cost increases and financial pressures were number 1. And so, for me, that sort of suggests that maybe the inflationary period's not quite under control, just where it needs to be.
So they're still feeling it?
Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. Economic conditions, as we mentioned. Staff retention and recruitment was also really really high up there, and a topic I can obviously talk a lot about and we'll touch on later. Yeah. But also market demand, so business confidence sort of fed in there a little bit as well. So they were the top 4 challenges.
And they align to what you're sort of either feeling or seeing?
Yeah, it's accurate. I mean, it's some pretty meaty challenges in there. I think the overarching challenge is there's just a continuation of significant uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that kind of links to the points around costs, the economic conditions, the demand side. And I think there's just a continuation of course correction, and it's going to take time to flush through the economy and the market. And what that means is it's pretty difficult to get an accurate view on the future. And I think those challenges compound into a bit of a fear around what could be around the corner.
Sure.
Having gone through what we've gone through the last 5 years, there could be something else out there.
Yeah.
Talk about geopolitics emerging and things like that, and that impacts confidence around decision making. And one of the key roles of a CFO is to prompt the biggest decisions in the business and sort of guide those through the business. But in these environments, it can be difficult to get a consensus on those big decisions. You get like different perspectives at the board level, different risk tolerances.
Yep.
And as a CFO, you got to kind of navigate through that. It's your job to sort of mediate that. So I think at the moment you get a lot of what I describe as decision overhead, where it takes a bit of extra time, analysis, meetings, just to get stuff done, which of course conflicts with trying to move at pace, which and the world keeps speeding up. So you just got to navigate that challenge with that uncertainty.
Yeah, we've actually seen a lot of that as well in hiring decisions. So
but for significant hiring decisions,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah. So the time it takes to make a decision on when to go to market, who to hire, what salary to pay, the decision-making timeframes are really, really extended during this last 6-month period. So yeah, absolutely seeing that in our market as well.
And I guess you compound that across every decision you're putting on the table, it just slows down a business, right? Or potentially slows down a business, and more work for you to get consensus.
Yeah, that's it. And you just got to navigate through that. It takes time.
Yeah. And so what does the year ahead look like, Lee? I guess we've probably covered a few of these points already, but what are the main focus areas on the minds of CFOs?
Yeah, so as we look ahead to the next 12 months, the headline in here was that cash flow and profitability are sort of front and centre. So 68% are looking to increase profitability, 49% were looking, focusing really heavily on cash flow and liquidity.
Yep.
But in here there was some really interesting stuff, probably one of my favourite parts of the survey actually, because 48% of businesses are looking towards cutting the right costs in their business.
The right costs.
Correct.
Okay.
Key word, right? And that sort of probably supports what I said earlier about the fact that we may not be out of the woods just yet. And when I think about cost cutting, the flow-on effect, particularly in a large corporate landscape, you sort of tends to lend itself towards restructures and redundancies. And actually, if you look at the unemployment rate currently, 4.4%, lots of economists picking that it will continue to rise and get it to about 5 or 5.2%. So that's probably in line with a lot of what we're hearing from the economists. But there was a juxtaposition in this part of the survey as well, because 48% said they're also looking to identify the right investments for growth.
We know about that theme.
Yeah, exactly right. So that, for me, half of the respondents looking at cost cutting, half of them looking at investment for growth. And so it probably says that around half of the respondents have been a little bit more bullish and optimistic about what's ahead. So really some interesting stuff there. Just to lean on the talent challenge as well, a lot of people did touch on the fact that talent and hiring in the next 12 months is going to be a key area of focus. So I think there was 6 out of 10 CFOs said they currently find it hard to find the right talent.
They're still finding it hard.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And so those 3 things line up as a really interesting sort of 12 months ahead for me.
And because for the listeners, Lee and I have known each other for a while, but we always talk about, and you can tell from Lee's accent, are Kiwis finally returning from London, or is it the same as what, like those challenges we've always talked about, you and I?
Yeah, so Kiwis travel,
Yep.
in the accounting and finance space in particular. They get their qualification, they drop into a CA firm, just as Scott did, go over to London and get the great OE.
Yeah.
COVID really broke the chain, right? So what we saw during COVID was a lot of people went,
Yep.
not a lot of people started to come home. And so we go to London every year.
Yes,
we hit
yeah.
the ground in June. We network with Kiwi expats and try and bring them home. It's been a real point of difference for us for the last couple of years. The last 3 years on the ground, we haven't seen many accountants come home from London until now. And so when we were there on the ground in June, we're just starting to see some people head home, which is really, really good for us.
Taps turned back on a bit.
Taps turn. It's a natural cycle. People go, they tend to come home for family, lifestyle reasons, and of course want to find a job to continue on their career. But it's really good for the New Zealand economy to have some talent coming home for the first time in a wee while. I think the challenge now for businesses on the ground here is, are you in a good enough position to attract them, retain them, get them into business and get them sort of helping the prosperity in New Zealand? Because if they land here and don't find a good job with the right salary, what are their options? Well, you're probably going to start to see them jump back over the water.
Or finding a place with a cracking CFO.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so everything Lee's just covered there, and that, Scott, does that, I guess, again, align with what's on your mind, or any other themes there that you have front and centre?
Well, look, it absolutely aligns. I mean, managing cash flow and profitability is always important,
of course,
as a CFO, and in business in general, right? And with inflationary pressure and now a slowdown on the demand side, that naturally puts profitability under pressure. And And some businesses won't be able to get that appropriate balance. And as Lee pointed out, that there's still nearly half of businesses are still looking for places to cut costs in the right way, just to kind of round out the profitability thereafter. The other point the report did call out was just the rising cost of compliance. Compliance costs not getting any smaller, and that's on a number of fronts: financial services, reporting and accounting standards, anti-money laundering, bringing in investment from overseas, ESG. There's a lot of compliance out there, and it's super important. We need to protect consumers, industries, and the environment. It all makes a lot of sense. There's a real need to find the balance of what's material. And a lot of the compliance, what follows it is a lot of reporting. And again, in the reporting, you've got to find the balance of what's material. And of course, investors want focused on materiality as well. So there should be real alignment between what businesses focus on from a compliance perspective and then what investors ultimately want.
And in our own business, that's front and center. But I can imagine when the buck stops on a lot of the reporting has to go through the CFO's desk. I imagine the ask on you is not immaterial.
Yeah, and it takes additional resource and additional talent. I mean, that's the other point that you've talked about there, Lee. And finding the right talent is tough. And the cost of living in New Zealand is going up. Affordability and incomes don't quite balance. And it feels to me that New Zealand is a net leaving. It's good to hear that there's sort of New Zealand is starting to shape up to come back, which would be great for the finance market for sure. But I do think over the long term we need to find a way to grow great businesses in New Zealand with great jobs, attract good investment from within New Zealand and abroad to just keep the talent here.
Yeah, if I just jump in there on that, Nigel. So in the report, we did talk a little bit around some political aspects and compliance costs, but also trying to simplify compliance was kind of on the wish list of we called it the postcard to the government.
For all CFOs.
Right across the board. The other thing that they talked about, which to touch on your point there, Scott, was actually policies around skilled migrant and talent shortages, because, for the first half of this year, we saw some really positive news around net migration. What we didn't see is us bringing in the right talent.
Skilled versus unskilled.
Correct, absolutely. So there's a section in the survey there which actually talks to sort of what CFOs want to see from the government.
Now, Scott, you set me up perfectly for sort of this next our second segment as such. Given this is a podcast on investing, and you were talking about sort of the key things you were looking for. How is 25 looking from an investment standpoint? And I guess what are the characteristics you look for in a great investment as a CFO?
Well, look, from an M&A perspective, over the short to medium term, I do expect the valuation expectations to keep aligning. I think they started to align, but that gap is closing where, the vendors' expectations some of which have been anchored in the world of zero interest rates. They're starting to realise that's not realistic. And so you're kind of seeing that meet, which is good. In terms of growth investments within the business, the cost of capital is front and centre of underpinning those decisions, and with the interest rates coming down, that certainly helps, and it also gives a business confidence to lean in on investments more. But what's core to investment decision making is always having a good line of sight to cash flow, profitability, and the return on the investment you're going to get. And I touched on it earlier, and it's just there is still that lingering concern or fear of what's just around the corner. And I know we've got a good lock on interest rates now. We seem to, but it just says that geopolitical uncertainty. And if you're in New Zealand running an international business, it would be on your mind. Could be a few things unfold over the near term there. I think investment confidence will take some time to rebuild. The volatility that we've seen over the last 5 years, there'll be quite a few CFOs, businesses out there that have been scarred by making the wrong investment decision.
Well, just before that sort of tide turned.
Over the last 5 or 6 years, it's probably paid too much for assets. And so there'll be a bit of recovery. It'd be hard to find a CFO whose risk appetite is pointing exactly to true north, So I think as we think about 25, it's about valuation alignment, confidence rebuilding, and the tailwind of the interest rates. To your other question around what makes a great investment, and the key thing is having a good view of the sustainable earnings of the business, good confidence in the forecast and the outlook, and also a good view on what it's going to cost you in terms of ongoing investment to realise the value from the investment thesis you're after. So I'd say as a CFO, you're always looking at the longer term. you're investing to create value for today's investors, but equally future investors. And what makes a great investment is one that's got clear financial returns, but also it builds a great equity story.
Yeah.
And, it sets you up for the next capital cycle, hitting horizon 1, 2, and 3 kind of objectives. So volatility makes all of that really hard. But now that we're starting to see some of that ease, let's hope that things are looking good.
I like what you're saying. So, try and look through that and keep that long-term. I'm sure we've said that probably on every podcast concerning customers. Lee, anything you wanted to add to?
Oh, look, just anecdotally, really, we're very privileged that we get to work with lots of different types of businesses and businesses who have different ownership structures. I caught up with a couple of the PE guys just recently, and
private equity.
Okay, and it feels like they are primed, ready to reinvest into New Zealand right now. So I know at least one that's got a war chest ready to invest and looking to buy over the next 12 to 18 months. They've skinnied down their portfolio. And so it's really exciting, right, for the New Zealand economy to think that actually some private equity money might be coming into the market. And then as soon as that happens, that obviously the Australian and Asian private equity guys are starting to take a look as well.
And that, I guess, you've set me up again. You guys are doing a great job. In a separate conversation you and I had as we talked about doing this podcast was, business leaders, you were seeing some that have a wait till 25 mindset, but then you sort of rebutted that a little bit, and it's kind of like, you can't wait. And what are you doing now to thrive in 25? You talk about the private equity sort of, they're looking for businesses and things like that. What should businesses be doing to set themselves up to thrive in 25?
Yeah, this whole survive to 25 has been a catchphrase that we've heard a lot this year, and it frustrates me so much because there's a lot that you can be doing in a downturn to actually prepare yourself for when the economy does start to turn. Look, if I actually just sort of step back into my world and from a recruitment perspective just for a moment, there's a lot that businesses can be doing to prepare themselves for 2025, making sure you have a clear view on what your talent pools look like, what you might need in the future, making sure that your EVP, your employer value proposition is in a good place so you know that you're ready to attract talent. But investing in your best talent now will actually save you in the long run, because as soon as the market turns, if you've got good talent in your business, people will be coming knocking for it. And that war for talent that we saw in the post sort of COVID period will really start to kick off again. So investing in your people, getting ready for what might be ahead is really, really important for CFOs, I feel.
And Scott, was there anything you wanted to, I guess you covered up a lot of the things you're focused on. Is there anything else what's top of mind for you for setting up TradeMe to thrive in 25? Anything?
Well, look, I think it is. Talent's so important. Right?
Yeah.
And getting the right talent into your business can double your productivity around certain aspects of your business. So it's always top of mind for me. And I think finding talent in the finance sector has been hard for a number of years.
Yeah.
I'm hanging hopes on these people coming back from the UK.
Yeah. I was going to say, I know a good recruiter as well. Final question I was going to ask you, Scott, and then Lee, if you want to add anything to it. Obviously top of mind for this podcast has been interest rates. They've been high for the last few years. We're starting to see them come back down. We often talk about the impact on households with mortgages, and they may be feeling the pinch. How do interest rates affect large businesses like TradeMe? And I guess, Lee, if you want to add anything else to close out after that.
Yeah, so, interest rates have multiple effects on large businesses, and obviously one of the big effects is there's an interest charge on your debt, and many big businesses got caught by the escalation in rates and hedged on the way up, and I think in some ways those positions are locked in for a while yet, so they may not see the direct benefit of the rates coming down straight away.
Acts as a lag, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. But then, so that's kind of your cash and your profitability on the cost of your debt. But then there's also the interest rates are affecting your investment decisions, as I talked about earlier.
Your cost of capital, yeah.
And your hurdle rates have gone up, and maybe they're going to start softening a bit, and you can lean into these investments more, as I mentioned. But I think the less direct but arguably biggest impact on your business is the impact of interest rates on the economy and the demand side of your business. I think, when these interest rates are high, it reduces the wallet of your existing customers. It makes your prospective customers, you're slower to act, and therefore you don't win as many new customers. And consumers have less money. The other dynamic we've seen, obviously, is the government changing how much they're wanting to spend as well. So if you're a business that has a lot of government contracts, again, there's been some challenges around, the the interest rates going up, but also what the government's kind of doing.
Yeah,
to
it's like a second derivative impact. Yeah,
that's right. And they all sort of linked. Hopefully we can start to see all that stuff level out a bit.
And I guess before I pass in the lead up and the prep for this, you guys would see it across everything, right? You're such a bellwether for demand across all those verticals.
Yeah, that's right. In Trade Me, we're very connected to New Zealand, right?
I like that. That sounds like a press release.
That's exactly right. Trying to help them connect to the life they want to live.
Oh, love it. Yeah. And Lee, anything to add to wrap up on interest rates?
Just to, not on interest rates specifically, but just on that change of government sort of context. The survey asked, what do people think about the change of government last year, and it's amazing that the stereotype that National has as being good for business. I think 80% of the survey responders said that they still believe that is going to be the case. And so for me, when I think about the economy moving forward, we need business confidence to come up. We also need consumer confidence. You talk about that sort of spend of wallet. We need consumer confidence to get back to where it should be. Those two things together will actually help us get the economy moving. And as a business owner in New Zealand, we need to see both sort of start to step up.
Gents, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful chat. I have my usual final question to wrap things up. I ask this of all guests, obviously. We'll start with you, Lee. What's something you can share with the listeners that you're either reading, watching, or listening to?
What I'm listening to is easy because I was lucky enough to get Oasis tickets for the reunion gig. So I'm back sort of learning the words to Wonderwall again.
Can't believe it.
But actually what I'm reading is really interesting. So I mentioned earlier, I've got a son. He's 11, and I'm reading a book by a lady called Celia Lashley called He'll Be All Right. She's a fascinating writer. She's an ex-prison officer for 10 years, and she did a study called the Good Man Project, where she went into 25 schools and got to learn about the minds of boys. And so she talks about the bridge of adolescence. They step on this bridge when they're sort of 12, 13 as boys, and they step off that bridge when they're 16, 17 as young men. And it's basically an advice, a book giving advice to parents of young boys. So not my normal go-to, but it's been fascinating reading.
I can tell you, as you talk, I can tell you it's making an impact.
It really is, yeah.
And Scott, for you?
Yeah, I've been listening to the All In podcast quite a lot.
Yes.
I don't necessarily agree with everything they rabbit on about, but I find it very interesting to hear all these different perspectives, especially as we get closer to the US election. So,
and that's a podcast of, I think broadly it's sort of 4 very well-known and US-based investors, right, talking about all manner of investment themes, but also politics and... Yeah,
and so they're all quite successful in their own right, and venture and business. And, they chew the fat over lots of topics, that global issues, not just US issues, and I find it quite intriguing. As I say, it's sometimes quite polarising, and you can't agree with everything they say.
Try it on, in other words, to see if it... My one this episode is just a recommendation around Liam Dan's new book, which was Barbecue Economics. Now, it's sort of a 101 book. It doesn't go not a lot of graphs, which yours truly loves, but it did have a wonderful bit in it that talks about a part that I wasn't really aware of, which was kind of like, 20 or 30 years ago of NZ's economic history and some of the major decisions that were made then that set up where we are now. So if you are wanting to delve into that on a rainy Sunday afternoon, I'd recommend the book. It's only about 200 and something pages, so easily digestible. And then around the barbecue, you're set up for summer.
Even a recruiter can sound like he knows what he's talking
about.
Right.
That's right. Thanks all. Thank you all for today's episode. Again, it's been a wonderful chat, and thank you for joining us. If you have a CFO you work with, be kind to them and make sure you pass on your thanks for all the things they help the business with. And if that CFO is you, then give yourself a pat in the back as well. To our listeners, thank you for taking the time to tune in today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next edition. So until then, happy investing, and it's bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.